You're listening to the BBC World Service and now Witness History with me, Rich Preston. And today I'm taking you back to October 1988 and the coming together of a group of unlikely allies to save 3 grey whales trapped in ice in northern Alaska. Oil companies, environmental activists, Indigenous people and even the US and Soviet militaries all joined forces in a fight to save the animals.
Off the coast of Alaska, sailors are trying to save 3 grey
My
whales.
immediate thing was, okay, we are going to get them out of here.
Cindy Lowry was based in Alaska at the time for the environmental group Greenpeace.
It was an emergency situation. They just didn't have much time.
The California grey whale can reach up to 15 metres in length and spend summer feeding in the waters off Alaska before heading south for the winter. But these whales had left it too late.
They were young whales, and I think they just stayed too long. They go up there to forage and to eat. And most of them would have been gone by then, but they stayed a little too long, and the ice started coming in and freezing.
The ice was slowly starting to freeze over them. They needed to get out.
I think my first thought was a Coast Guard to see where the U.S. Coast Guard cutters were. They said there was one, but it was already starting to head east, and there was no way they were going to turn it around for 3 whales.
With the US Coast Guard unwilling to help, Cindy made another call to the US National Guard. She got a Colonel Schaefer on the phone.
He said, let's see what we can do about the cutter and then other equipment.
News of the whales was spreading. Cindy got an unexpected call from an oil company.
This anonymous person called me and just said, I think we have a barge that might be helpful. If you want us to try to help, let me know.
Cindy was told about an agreement between the US and Russia that existed despite the ongoing Cold War.
And so I started trying to figure out, if we can't use a Coast Guard cutter, what about Russia? Where would their icebreakers be at that time of year? Would there be any nearby?
But her suggestion was knocked back by local officials. The US could handle this problem on its own.
It was probably 25 above and sunny, but it's the expanse. It's just so vast, and that was it. It was just all white ice, and couldn't really see where the sky separated from the ice. And then, of course, the gray whales are gray, and the water seems sort of grayish. And to hear them breathing, and they were blowing air and trying to, just exist. And it was so quiet, and it was just total stillness except for their breathing.
By now, news of the whales' plight had spread around the world.
In Alaska, a huge operation is underway to save 3 stranded whales. They're trapped in ice-packed waters 18 miles northwest of Point Barrow.
The whales had been trapped for at least a week. Outside help was still some distance away, leaving the job of keeping the whales alive to the locals, including the Indigenous Inuit people.
The 3 Californian grey whales are still huddled together in a tiny hole in the ice. The hole has been shrinking steadily, and the whales have cuts and bruises from bashing up against the jagged ice. The nearest open sea is at least 5 miles away, too far for them to swim without breathing.
It was just day to day trying to keep them alive. To some extent, we were waiting for the oil companies' different types of equipment they were going to try to get there. The Inuit folks said, let's just try using chainsaws to cut rectangular holes and give them more space at the very least.
The whales had been given the Inuit names Putu, Siku and Kanik, and the English names Bonnet, Crossbeak and Bone. The youngest one, Bone, was thought to be only 9 months old.
Day and night, the Eskimos and the scientists trek out across the Arctic snowscape to the 3 captives. The temperature's well below 0 at the beginning of winter. Around the whales, the waters threaten continually to freeze over, and the watchers battle to prevent it. The effort now is to cut new holes in the ice and train the whales to move down the line to open water.
But the plan wasn't working.
They weren't moving. Greenpeace said, we have a person that we know of that has used, sound and music recordings. And so he came up and we tried that. They just weren't moving. And then I think, again, the same colleague that I know had mentioned that the National Marine Fisheries Lab in Seattle had killer whale recordings and that they might be able to send those up to me because would be a natural predator of gray whales. Tried those. And then probably, it seemed like within an hour or 2 or so, all of a sudden they started moving and started going to all the different holes, which was so great.
That feeling of joy didn't last long. Cindy and her team suddenly realised there weren't 3 whales anymore. There were 2.
Right at that moment of thinking, oh gosh, we've figured out a way to get them to move. Thank goodness. Now we've got a little more time. The smaller whale didn't show up. We just didn't see him.
One of the 3 whales trapped in Alaska has disappeared under the thick ice and is thought to have died. The whales have been trapped near Barrow since they were caught in the Arctic ice 2 weeks ago.
Deteriorating weather conditions were making the remaining 2 whales' chances of survival look even slimmer.
It was starting to get really cold. Of course, it's getting darker too. The winds were coming up, so it was getting really slushy. The holes weren't staying open.
2 brothers from Minnesota turned up with what the rescuers nicknamed the whale jacuzzi.
They have these things they use in Minnesota in their lakes called de-icers, and it looks like the size of a laptop. I mean, they're not big, and they have like a little rotary thing on them. So they tried it and it wouldn't work. We're just like, oh no. And it was again, another one of these desperate things because it was slushy ice. And then he tried it again and it started working. I mean, it does make me teary thinking about it. I mean, there's probably, 7 or 8 of us out there. I mean, we were just jumping up and down and, oh my gosh, one more time in the nick of time, they're saved.
As the whale jacuzzis kept the slush at bay, the oil companies arrived with a new tool.
We all called it the bullet, this huge kind of concrete round thing that they would hang from the Sky Crane helicopter, and they can put it down into the ice and bring it back up, and it's supposed to punch holes in the ice. They tried it, and it didn't work. So then it became, well, what are we going to do here?
Then the news Cindy had been hoping for. The Russians were coming.
A phone call came in saying, okay, it had been agreed that they would come and help. They actually were, 200 miles away.
But the news didn't go down well with everyone.
Some folks at the National Guard really didn't want them to come. I think it sort of was, the United States can take care of it ourselves. And it was clear to all of us on the ice that the icebreaker is what we were going to need in the end.
The 2 ships, the Admiral Makarov and the Vladimir Arsenyev, made their way towards US waters. One of them flew the American Stars and Stripes alongside the hammer and sickle of the Soviet Union. One night out on the ice, Cindy saw some lights appearing on the horizon.
Of course, you're in the middle of total blackness. The icebreaker sort of looked like lit up New York City skyscrapers or something. I mean, it was so huge.
The breakers started cutting through the ice. Cindy took her last opportunity to say a final goodbye to the whales.
So I went to that last hole where the light was and just kind of kneeled down, not real close to the hole, but like close enough that the water was coming on me. It was just, again, one of these really magical experiences that I will always have. And I don't even know now which one it was, but it came up and rested its chin on that edge of the ice. So we just had that moment looking at each other in the eyes. And I just said, you are going home.
It was the last time Cindy saw the whales, and the mission was declared a success. The decision was made not to tag the animals, so their fate was never known for certain. But Cindy Lowry says she knows they made it. She was speaking to me, Rich Preston, for Witness History.